Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday morning. We are anticipating a great deal of snow this afternoon, I understand.
Big snowfall in Washington, D.C., but we are free of snow so far.
You know, everybody panics so much about this incoming snow. I'm still planning to go various places in my car today because I'm from the cold, distant, isolated, dreary north of our great country.
A rugged Michigander, but
Yes.
You didn't bring your scooter in today.
No, we left the scooter at home.
So you got to draw the line somewhere.
Yes,
in any event, let's get to it. Robbie, what's on your radar?
I think we're going to argue about this one. Now, fresh off targeting USAID, an agency that spends billions of dollars overseas in the form of foreign aid, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is next expected to gut the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. I say good riddance. The CFPB is a business-killing monstrosity that makes services more expensive for consumers and is, quite by design, unaccountable to Congress. Musk recently tweeted CFPB RIP, making clear that he would like to kill the agency. And he has President Donald Trump's support. In a statement, the White House described the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as a, quote, slush fund in support of radical advocacy groups. Quote, the CFPB has long functioned as another woke, weaponized arm of the bureaucracy that leverages its power against certain industries and individuals disfavored by so-called elites. Supporters of the organization were furious. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted, by freezing the CFPB, the Trump administration is dismantling critical consumer protections that return billions of dollars to taxpayers. Let's be clear, Republicans are enabling financial predators to rip off hardworking Americans to reward their billionaire donors, end quote. Now, people who don't know very much about the agency might be tempted to agree with Pelosi. After all, consumer protection, that sounds like a worthwhile goal, right? But it's important to take a closer look at what CFPB actually accomplishes. The organization was originally the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren and came into existence in 2010 in response to the financial crisis. Importantly, the agency was structured as an independent bureau of the Federal Reserve. In my radar yesterday, I explained why many libertarians like myself are distrustful of the Fed, which operates outside congressional overview and has tremendous power to affect the money supply. Well, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is just as sheltered from congressional oversight and then some. As a result, the CFPB often makes rules for businesses and financial institutions that were never approved or recommended by legislators. For instance, during the last few days of the Biden administration, the CFPB issued a rule that prevents credit reports from considering medical debt when they issue a credit score. Look, I'm sympathetic to people who owe medical debt, and I advocate reforming the healthcare system. But isn't it kind of crazy for the government to tell a private credit score issuing organization that they are not allowed to consider whether an individual owes significant medical debt when calculating their credit? Isn't that kind of like telling, I don't know, a property manager that they aren't allowed to ask prospective renters whether they make enough money to pay the rent? Now, keep in mind, this prohibition on including medical debt was never debated, discussed, or voted on by anyone in the legislature. It's simply something the CFPB decided on, but it has the force of law. It lacks democratic accountability. You can't vote for or against the politicians who implemented it. It's exactly the kind of thing that Trump and Musk and DOGE are working against. As George Mason University economist Veronique DeRougy, a friend of mine, explained in a recent article arguing for the organization's entire abolition, it uses rules on home mortgages. The rules on home mortgages that the CFPB implemented end up making it harder to qualify for loans if you are self-employed or have a non-traditional source of income, ultimately pushing these borrowers toward non-qualified mortgage loans and higher rates. DeRougy writes that the agency's crackdown on credit card fees led to higher interest rates and fewer card options for lower-income consumers. In the payday lending industry, the CFPB's meddling has pushed vulnerable consumers toward predatory alternatives, end quote. That's by design. The philosophy of the CFPB is that people are too stupid to know what kinds of financial arrangements work best for them. In practice, it makes it more difficult for low-income people to get loans, to qualify for credit cards, to buy houses, because the CFPB is imposing costs and restrictions on financial institutions that make it prohibitively difficult for those businesses to provide their services to low-income people. Now, there are costs to all these regulations, by the way, costs that businesses always and everywhere pass on to you and me, the consumer. In the name of protecting consumers, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is actually making their lives much, much more difficult. If financial institutions are engaged in outright fraud or deception, that's illegal. There's already a regulatory agency to police them, like the Federal Trade Commission. The CFPB, on the other hand, just makes financial transactions and services more expensive and less available to low-income people. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are putting consumer welfare first if and when they decide to kill it.
Oh, Robbie. Oh, we're going to have a big disagreement on this one.
Give it to me, Niall.
Well, here's the thing. I think that basically the arguments here are being made on behalf of the financial services industry, which always wants as little regulation and scrutiny as possible. So you described the CFPB as a business-killing monstrosity. One of the cases that it has been most to the fore in recently was the Wells Fargo case of malfeasance, where 16 million accounts were subject to illegal practices, basically being nickel and dimed, having fake charges applied to them and things like that. I looked up before this segment the most recent enforcement actions that the CFPB had taken, so I couldn't be just accused of cherry picking something like the Wells Fargo thing. So the last four were Wise PLC, a British-based provider of remittance services and prepaid cards. It had advertised incorrect fees regarding ATM charges and was fined. Equifax, the credit reporting company, failing to investigate disputed charges, including when people said their credit was being hit by identity fraud, by other people making charges or posting charges on their behalf, fined about $15 million. Honda Finance, telling people that they could defer payments, and when those payments were deferred, reporting those accounts as negligent and hitting their credit card, or their credit rating, I should say. And then Block, which is the owner of Cash App, inefficient scrutiny of fraud, and when people reported fraud, there were no telephone customer service representatives to report it to. They were fined a large sum of money, $130 million. These are actions that are taken to protect ordinary people against predatory practices on the part of the financial industry. And that is an important role to play, and the CFPB is to the fore in playing that role.
What do you think those financial institutions do when they have to pay those fines? They pass the cost on directly they just increase the price of the services they're offering.
Right.
Or they shutter, and then ideologically, what I don't like about the organization, they'll say this kind of, the credit card company is saying, or the credit score calculating agency is saying, we would like to offer the service. A low-income person is saying, we're willing to pay for this service. And the government is coming and saying, no, you're getting ripped off, man. Don't do this. Well, you consent and you consent. It's none of your business.
But in these instances, that is not what is happening. In the instances of, for example, applying inaccurate ATM fees or saying to people, yeah, you can defer payments and then reporting accounts as negligent, that is not some business transaction where two consenting parties agree to something that we as individuals might or might not think is wise. That is people being ripped off. And your argument about what happens with the fines is in effect an argument that financial institutions or any other business should never be fined because they just pass the cost on to the consumer. We can't have, well, how are we going to punish them then? I mean, if we want to throw them in jail instead, that's fine.
Let's not punish ourselves. We're punishing ourselves. We should
make
it easier to do business.
Anybody for anything ever, because the cost is pushed to some other party.
If you are wronged by some kind of institution, there are systems to bring them to justice in the civil system. They got to pay you. This is not a. This is an unaccountable bureaucracy that purports to speak on your behalf. Micromanaging how financial institutions do their business in a way that makes the service more expensive for you, or cancels the service you yourself want. Again, a substantial aspect of this is credit card services or loan services being shut off for low-income people because they have to pay very high interest rates for them because these are risky loans to be made to low-income people. And so yeah, it's an arm and a leg for you, but if that's what you agree to do and you need that service, it's not the government's business to say, no, we don't think you should have that service.
I think that the reason for the CFPB's existence is because predatory and abusive and misleading practices are so widespread.
Well, then let Congress pass a law. That's the other part of it. This is just, again, it's a board of people operating wholly independently from Congress under the purview of the Federal Reserve. These rules, these policies aren't being debated or approved by anyone in Congress. It's just a rogue agency doing whatever it wants with no oversight.
Defending the common people from the predatory nature of the financial.
Yeah, I love love having the services we use being made more expensive by government.
Well, they're being made more expensive by people who aren't telling you the truth about the charges you're incurring.
Now, I think the people not telling the truth about these charges is often the CFPB. We'll see what happens with that. More Rising coming up next. Stay tuned. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has started off the week on a high note, to say the least.
President Donald Trump's Department of Justice has ordered Southern District of New York prosecutors to drop the bribery case against Adams.
In a letter to Manhattan prosecutors, Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove wrote, "You are directed, as authorized by the Attorney General, to dismiss the pending charges." The letter continued, "It cannot be ignored that Mayor Adams criticized the prior administration's immigration policies before the charges were filed, and the former U.S. Attorney's public actions created appearances of impropriety." Bove also said that the case was interfering with Adams' ability to fight the migrant and violent crime crises and his electoral campaign. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, however, will get to review Adams' case after the election and restore the charges if necessary. Adams told a Fox reporter on Monday that he wanted to talk to his lawyer before giving a formal response to the news.
Prosecutors had charged Adams in September of last year with conspiracy, wire fraud, bribery, and taking illegal foreign campaign contributions. More specifically, prosecutors alleged that Adams took luxury flights on Turkish Airlines without reporting the benefits. In exchange, Adams allegedly fast-tracked the approval of a new 36-story Turkish consulate in Manhattan.
Here's Trump commenting on the case in December.
I think that he was treated pretty unfairly. Now, I haven't seen the gravity of it all, but it seems, like being upgraded in an airplane many years ago. I know probably everybody here has been upgraded. They see you're all stars, and they say, I want to upgrade that person from NBC. I'm going to upgrade him. He essentially went against what was happening with the migrants coming in. And, he made some pretty strong statements like, this is not sustainable. I said, you know what, he'll be indicted soon. And I said it, not as a prediction, a little bit lightheartedly, but I said it. I said, he's going to be indicted.
Former Obama campaign chief strategist David Axelrod wrote on X, "Here's the new reality. The Department of Justice is now an unofficial arm of the White House political office. Every poll, every business, everyone now knows. If you play ball with POTUS, you'll get a free pass. And if you don't, watch out." Guardian Angels founder and Republican New York City mayoral candidate Curtis Sliwa wrote, "Let's be clear, Eric Adams is corrupt and a disgrace to politics. In his 2021 campaign running against me, Adams took numerous illegal contributions, and about a dozen of his associates have now pled guilty to crimes. His foot soldiers will spend time behind bars while Adams walks free. New Yorkers aren't dumb. Ask yourself, why did those people plead guilty? Were they lying? No, they told the truth. Today's decision by the Justice Department is an insult to the intelligence of the people of this great city."
Meanwhile, Outkick founder Clay Travis wrote, "Trump's Department of Justice is dropping all charges against New York City Mayor Adams. Good move, the case was complete and total garbage." Former Fox News host Geraldo Rivera wrote recently, U.S. Attorney in Manhattan should admit the case against Mayor Eric Adams is weak, lame, political, and should be dropped. Then the mayor can run for re-election against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. So the Curtis Sliwa quote you read, that's from someone who is a arch anti illegal immigration activist person, so not some Dem squish type person, which speaks to the fact that I think there is some legitimate disagreement about doing this on the right. Yes, Eric Adams at some point started talking a stronger game against illegal migration. I don't actually see much evidence that he really tried to use his powers to thwart it and was stopped by the deep state. That seems to be a post facto rationalization he's come up with. It being cited that he was thwarted in his efforts to deal with immigration is why these charges are political. Look, if you want to argue to me that the charges are that what he did was bad but kind of trivial and is not really worth pursuing further, that is an argument I am theoretically open to. The argument that he should not be pursued because this is actually political revenge for taking the strong stance against immigration, that just seems totally disconnected from reality to me. I don't think, from a conservative perspective, I don't think he was delivering on conservative policy. I think they came after him because they had evidence of corruption. Again, if it's kind of trivial, it's not, the Menendez case where there's gold bars stuffed in his shoes or whatever, maybe it is worth dismissing. I'm open to that argument, but I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, and to your credit, when we have discussed this case previously, you have made the point that there is a danger of, whatever you want to say, MAGA or pro-Trump people becoming easy marks for people who don't in fact believe those views, but mouth them in order to gain some.
Menendez is already doing that. He's already started doing that.
Right, it's saying that he is like Trump, a victim, and that Trump has correctly identified politicization in the Justice Department. Yeah. In Eric Adams' case, of course, he
started doing it immediately.
He did, and he went down to Mar-a-Lago just within the past few weeks to have a visit that was unclear exactly what he was going for, and now he has been, these charges are effectively being lifted against him. I also think in terms of the introduction that we read, with all due respect to Geraldo and other people of that nature, I think they have a very, very generous interpretation of the case against Eric Adams, as in they think that case is weaker than I think it is. This is not, as Trump said fairly ludicrously, about someone getting an upgrade. This is about years and years of perks being siphoned to someone, and then at a later point, that person appearing to be instrumental in doing that country's bidding, doing the bidding of Turkey, in allowing this consulate to open when it did not have the requisite fire checks in place. It's the only building of that size that has apparently been able to do that. So there was, I think the evidence that there was a quid pro quo is very, very clear.
Sure, although then that starts to get into is it just like really, really unnecessarily difficult to build and open new buildings in New York City?
Yeah, but that's everyone?
A separate. You need to find a public official and upgrade their flights is the only way you can get anything built or done in New York City. No, unfortunately, I think that would be sad if that's the case.
The most convoluted argument possible for Eric Adams accepting bribes.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it's okay. Let's reform the process and make it easier to build and open new buildings.
Well, maybe. I mean, we can have a debate about the New York City fire codes if you like, but the point about it is that Adams, in the process of apparently trying to conceal these perks, the indictment against him laid out all the kind of bizarre methods they went to, including on one occasion he either sent someone an email or left a phone message suggesting that he had left cash to pay for these flights when he clearly hadn't. And the fake message that he had left the cash was being presented by prosecutors rightly as evidence that he knew he was doing something shady.
I'm still on what I was saying earlier.
All right,
isn't there a whole argument against those ridiculous protective scaffolding things that go up when buildings are being done construction on,
and all that, right?
I'm not broad. I've never lived in New York City, so I'm not super familiar with this. But I believe I've heard arguments that those don't really enhance safety at all, and just make it slower and less and more expensive to do new construction in New York. So I've certainly heard arguments against that.
Despite the fact that I have lived in New York City very happily when I first came to the US, I am not an expert on its scaffolding regulations, so we'll have to leave. But I do think that the mayor shouldn't be accepting bribes, allegedly.
No debate there. Coming up next on Rising, we will discuss Trump's plans for Gaza Lago. Stay tuned. Well, calm in the Middle East lasted just about a week, as Hamas threatened Monday to withdraw from the tenuous ceasefire agreement with Israel. President Trump said if the remaining hostages are not released by Saturday, then
Well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that be because that's Israel's decision. But as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out.
And that's not all. Trump's plan to develop Gaza as a premier resort of some kind is having major repercussions in the Middle East.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who you just saw in that clip, applauded the plan, but much of the world was taken aback.
Trump dug in. He is now threatening to end American financial support for Jordan if it fails to accept up to 2 million Palestinians.
And that's Sophie's choice for the tiny nation that has been the most reliable Arab ally of the United States in the region. No aid means the end of the tiny Hashemite kingdom, but so does agreeing to accept up to 2 million Palestinians.
Jordan's King Abdullah is meeting with Trump today to try to correct the U.S. president's vision for Gaza and the 2 million Palestinian refugees. With us now to discuss is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome back to Rising.
Thank you.
So what are the chances that this deal, the 10 U.S. peace deal, I think that's how we described it, does actually collapse now? What is the timeline for releasing the hostages? And are we now in jeopardy of Israel and Hamas having another round of warfare between them?
Well, we are at jeopardy of all of those things, and very much as a result of Trump coming out with his vision of saying that essentially he's going to turn Gaza into some sort of a beach resort without the Palestinians. If you are sitting in Hamas's shoes or any Palestinian faction's shoes, the entire point of the ceasefire was to get back to a situation in which the Palestinians would have control to the extent that they can under occupation of their own territory. But if you're saying that the ceasefire eventually will lead to ethnic cleansing of Gaza, with all of these Palestinians being shoved into the Sinai or into Jordan, then suddenly the incentive structure for any Palestinian faction to go along with this, obviously, is going to be very questionable. From the Israeli standpoint, this is music to their ears. I think, to be frank, Netanyahu was quite surprised. They didn't expect to get this much. In fact, they hadn't even been pushing for this much from Trump, but they got it. And this gives them a perfect way out to make sure that they never have to go to phase 2 of the deal that Witkoff and Trump helped negotiate and secure, which from the outset had been a big suspicion that Netanyahu never wanted to actually make the deal go beyond phase 1. And now in the Knesset, he's openly bragging that complete victory, total victory is in sight now, and that's what they're going to go for. Total victory means no compromise. It means that Israel manages to get everything that it wants. And in terms of Gaza, that means a Gaza Strip that is depopulated, that is ethnically cleansed from Palestinians. This is going to be profoundly destabilizing for the region, and it will completely counter what Trump has promised the American people, which is to help the United States get out of the Middle East. This is going to suck the U.S. back into it. Just today, reports came out that about 100 special forces of the United States have now been hired as contractors to man the checkpoints in Gaza. So we're getting sucked back in, and this is very much as a result of Trump adopting this truly destabilizing and shocking idea.
Trita, I wanted to pick up on that point you raised about the destabilizing effect in the broader region, because of course this isn't just confined to Gaza, or for that matter not confined to Gaza, Jordan and Egypt even. There is obviously a danger, I think, of this proposal inflaming the quote-unquote Arab street to a large extent, and obviously perhaps boosting anti-American sentiment further. So how does this all play out? Because to be fair, the United States does have fairly significant leverage with Jordan and Egypt because of the amount of aid provided. But how does it play out in the broader region in terms of the instability that you're talking about?
Well, first of all, what you pointed out in the introduction is absolutely true. On the one hand, Jordan can likely not be able to make it without the aid that the U.S. provides. On the other hand, they can also absolutely not make it if they have to take 1 million to 2 million refugees. And it's not just about the numbers, it's also about the identity of Jordan itself. Already half of its population are Palestinian refugees. And this was just throw off the existing balance. And then again, as you mentioned, Jordan has been one of the more stable countries in the region for some time now. This would destabilize, potentially bring down the king and his government altogether. So that in and of itself will have profound destabilizing implications for the region. But beyond that, I mean, you have not a single country in the region coming out in support of this. The Turks have said it's unacceptable. The Saudis have come out with some of their strongest statements against this idea. And it's really interesting because it really seems to be killing whatever chance there was for Trump to get some sort of a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal. And what is fascinating here is to see how little the Israelis care that those chances are now being minimized to next to zero. Because between the option of total victory and ethnic cleansing in Gaza and getting rid of the Palestinians altogether, and normalization with Saudi Arabia, which would be followed likely by normalization with other Arab countries, it's clear that the Israelis, at least the Netanyahu government, prefers the former rather than the latter. So the idea that normalization was some sort of a big prize for the Israelis, which they themselves had said for some time, seems not to be the case, because they seem to be quite happy of foreclosing that opportunity, instead going for what Netanyahu has called total victory, completely depopulate Palestinian territories and annex it with the blessing of the United States.
I mean, it just seems to become very, like, what is the good or desirable option? Israel doesn't want these people, frankly, on its borders. None of these other countries.
It's not Israel's choice. These people have been there for thousands of years. So whether it wants it or not, we have to recognize that certain things are not on the table.
Well, I mean, they don't have to do anything if they're willing to continue a war against the terrorist group controlling the region and accept any number of casualties. I mean, they're not going to be stopped from doing that. And if no other country is willing to take in the Palestinians, and I mean, what is? Are we thinking of the Palestinians as a monolith? Do they all wish to remain in an area that has now been totally destroyed? Do they not? What is their desire at this point?
Well, I think that is a very simple question, because the desire for the Palestinians for more than 70 years is to be able to go back to their country. Many of the people of the Palestinians in Gaza are refugees who were living in Palestine before the creation of Israel and before the 1947 Nakba. So they were pushed into Gaza. And their commitment to their land is solid. It is grounded in international law, reaffirmed by the ICJ decision last year, reaffirmed by the UN General Assembly resolution in September of last year. So there's never been a question about that. I actually think it's pretty good that Trump is willing to think outside of the box, because the box the United States has been thinking in is exactly what has led us to this situation. So I think that's very good. But he's thinking in the wrong side of the outside of the box. What we really need right now, and what he seemed to have suggested early on, was to actually have a creation of a Palestinian state, together with security guarantees for the Israelis, to make sure that both countries, both peoples, can have their right for sovereignty and national statehood satisfied with security. That option is still on the table. It needs political will from all sides to push it through. And Trump had the opportunity, particularly if he wanted to do a normalization between the Saudis and the Israelis, in which the Saudis increasingly were moving close to actually demanding a Palestinian state, not just the pathway to it being part of the deal. This could have been done. This still can be done. Instead, he's going down the path that will create another refugee crisis, another destabilizing event in the region that will then haunt the region and the United States for decades to come. And it will not be a solution. The idea that this actually is a solution that provides the Israelis with security has been disproven over and over again. If it was true, all the previous rounds of ethnic cleansing would actually have provided Israel with that security, and clearly it has not.
Trita, before we let you go, I want to ask a question more about the practicalities rather than the politics. I saw at the end of last year a UN report that around 69 or 70% of all the structures in Gaza have either been destroyed or damaged. And I'm reading other reports that just clearing unexploded ordnance from there could take years. So what is your best guess as to how that gets done? I mean, do we see, separate from Trump's plan, do we see other Arab nations come in to assist with that rebuilding, or how does it work?
Obviously, all of those things are going to be very challenging and very costly. Those things will have to be done either way, though. So even if you want to turn it into a beach resort, you still have to do the cleaning up of all of the different bombs that the Israelis have dropped in Israel, in Gaza, and all the building that it has destroyed. So that is inescapable. The question is, the United States, I assume, is not going to fund and pay the bill for that cleaning up. The United States is going to expect some of the... Yeah, exactly. But, given the fact that Trump was going to move away from nation building and things like that, which I strongly endorse him for and support, this is nation building on crack. So this is a complete turnaround from and a betrayal of his base in many different ways. I don't think it has quite sunk in yet because people are still doubting whether he's really serious or if this is just a negotiation tactic. But if you want to get someone else to fund this, and there is obviously the option of going to some of the Gulf Arab states who have the means to be able to fund something, they're not going to fund it if it's going to be part of an ethnic cleansing campaign. You might have a chance of getting them to fund it as they have done before, if this is the beginning of actually getting some sort of a stability there. But they're not going to underwrite the ethnic cleansing campaign of the century for Trump. That's just simply not going to happen.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's been a few weeks since we've discussed this individual, but he's back on the radar. That is Luigi Mangione.
The December 4th Legal Committee had created a fund for Mangione's defence, and they say the murder suspect has now accepted $300,000 in donations.
Mangione is accused of murdering United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside of a hotel in Manhattan in December. The former Ivy Leaguer has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Sam Beard, a D4 Legal Committee spokesperson, said in a statement, "We're thrilled that Luigi is accepting these funds so that he can mount the strongest defense possible. The American private health insurance industry has ruined countless lives by denying people access to basic care and burying families in medical debt. It's no surprise that Luigi's alleged actions are understood and supported by tens of millions of hardworking Americans."
Mangione's lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilio, told Newsweek that Mangione appreciates the donations and plans to use them.
Police say that when they found Mangione at a McDonald's, he had a manifesto on him that read, "These parasites simply had it coming." Those parasites being the health insurance industry. Fox News contributor and law professor Jonathan Turley wrote on X, "Luigi Mangione has now received over $250,000 from donors supporting his cause. What cause would that be? It's like an American Hunger Games with silver parachutes for your favorite lethal combatant."
Author and conservative pundit Juanita Broderick also chimed in, writing, "Every last cent should go to the family of the man Mangione allegedly murdered in cold blood."
Well, look, I support people's right to give money to causes. People, if they feel strongly, are well within their rights to donate money to the defense of Luigi Mangione, and Mangione is entitled to due process and the best defense he can buy, and if he couldn't afford a defense, he's entitled to the one that the state provides you with. He is free to make a full-throated argument for his innocence. I think the evidence of his guilt is overwhelming, not least of all because it's captured on video, and I think you're insane to give money to this cause, but my opinion doesn't matter. It's your right. You can do it if you want. There's nothing new about it, by the way. People have been giving, sending love letters, and that's I see it in. I think people are trying to round it up to like some principled ideological stance against the insurance industry when there's a long history of crazy women in particular sending love letters to serial killers in prison because they're insane. But What else can I say about it?
Well,
Do that if you want, none of my business.
I think there is actually, I don't know if I'd say widespread sympathy. I think there is a lot of antagonism plainly toward the health insurance industry. Now, does that mean that people think you should go and allegedly shoot people dead on Manhattan streets? Not necessarily, but I think that one of the reasons that he is getting this fairly significant fund to draw his defence fund from is partly because there are some people who do have sympathy for it. Now, you're right, irrespective of what you or I might think about giving money to any particular defendant, people have the right to do that. I was very critical, as you're well aware, of the Daniel Penny case, and I'm sure that people contributed a very significant amounts of money to his defence. I can't remember the figures involved, although I seem to recall they were higher than this. You know, contribute to whatever you wish. I think that Luigi Mangione does have every right, as you say, to make the case for his innocence. He has pleaded guilty to some of the state charges. I believe he's yet to plead, but is expected to plead not guilty to the others. In addition to the amount of antagonism toward the health insurance industry, I do think it's interesting. I think I'm broadly more sympathetic to him than you are, but you have at times talked about the idea of overcharging people. And in New York, he's charged with first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. Now, I take the point that if there is some sort of political agenda to an act of violence, you can define that as terrorism. But the indictment talks about the intention to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. I find it difficult, even if he is guilty of what he is accused of being, to say that it is really an act of terrorism in that kind of sense. It is an act of violence that has a political motivation, but is that always automatically terrorism? It seems different to me to the indiscriminate killing of civilians.
No. I think these are very fair questions. First of all, it just doesn't matter. I mean, he's going to be the sentence that comes with cold-blooded murder in the street is so significant. It's not like, what does the terrorism enhancement get you beyond that? I agree with you that it's not. Now, terrorism is a very ill-defined concept anyway, and then attempts to define it better, I even actually oppose those, because then they're trying to rope in more and more activity as terrorism. Yeah, there's something. It was a targeted assassination for a personal grievance that does have a political lens and is, I think, in some level resonating with people because of political reasons, even though I think most of it is just garden variety. He's good looking and compelling for that reason, and people are crazy.
Let's not objectify Luigi too much. His looks
no, I mean he's been objectified in the media, on social media. That has an effect on people. That has a contagion effect.
Well, it does.
And that is why he's
but I don't think
he got star treatment.
Yeah, but I don't think his looks are the exclusive reason for that. His looks don't hurt because we're in a very visual era, and of course any kind of physical attractiveness or charisma helps. But I also think that there is so much rage about the kind of avarice of the health insurance industry that I do think that plays into sympathy for him in a pretty significant way.
I think this would have been much less of a story if he was not, it's not just good looking, but compelling in the same way that, Charles Manson was compelling to people, right? Because he had some kind of hypnotic, evil, psychopathic, malignant, devil-derived power over people, and that sometimes happens. But going back to the terrorist thing, I would not charge him additionally with terrorism. I think there's way too much. And then when they overcharge you that much, there's pressure, I always talk about this, to plead guilty to some kind of lesser thing because they've stacked so many things against you. I think he's obviously guilty of murder, should be found guilty of murder. I wouldn't throw the terrorism stuff in there.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I don't know what the basis of his not guilty charge really is, or not guilty plea, I should say. And he obviously has, as we've said repeatedly, the right to make that. And we shall see. But it does not sound like you will be grabbing your phone to contribute to the GoFundMe. Or
not be chipping in for the defense. No, thank you. Next up. Did USAID fund biological weapons in, you can probably guess where, starts with a W and rhymes with Luhan, Talk to you soon. USAID is in the news again.
The agency has faced mounting scrutiny over what kinds of initiatives it's funding around the world.
Some examples are a $2 million grant for sex change procedures in Guatemala, or a $70,000 DEI-themed musical in Ireland. Other projects USAID has funded, however, appear dangerous. Earlier this month, Elon Musk tweeted, quote, "Did you know that USAID, using your tax dollars, funded bioweapon research, including COVID-19, that killed millions of people?" Now, some critics say, well, that's far-fetched or untrue, but Daily Caller News Foundation reporter Emily Kopp is trying to clear up any confusion. In a recent piece for the Daily Caller News Foundation, she wrote, "Elon Musk's claim linking USAID to bioweapons isn't as far-fetched as the deep state wants you to think." Kopp writes, "The distinction between offensive bioweapons work and defensive biosciences comes down to intent." That's according to what experts told her. The USAID PREDICT program's stated mission was to, quote, "strengthen global capacity for detection of viruses with pandemic potential that can move between animals and people. In order to test which viruses sampled in nature have that potential to drive pandemics, researchers sometimes employ gain-of-function research, experiments that do make viruses more deadly or transmissible. This may make research on viruses with unknown properties dual use, capable of serving civilian research purposes or being misapplied for military aims." In a June 2023 piece for U.S. Right to Know, Kopp also wrote about how EcoHealth Alliance President Peter Daszak was using USAID funds to fly in relative comfort and style. She wrote, quote, "Daszak and other senior virus hunters requested at least $292,000 in government-funded international business class flights over the course of 3 years." Here to discuss it all is Emily Kopp herself. Emily, newly with the Daily Caller News Foundation. Welcome back to Rising.
Great to be here.
So let's actually start with those flights. I think many people watching this program who have a lot of criticisms of EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak and that organization's role in misleading the public about where research dollars would be spent and what experiments would be funded are probably not thrilled to hear that USAID was also paying for his flights.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a reason that Elon Musk held up EcoHealth Alliance and this USAID program that underwrote EcoHealth Alliance as sort of the epitome of USAID waste and even dangerous spending. Daszak worked on, and EcoHealth Alliance were contractors on this USAID underwritten program called PREDICT. It might be the best paid USAID health program that's ever existed. It was $200 million to fund these virologists to go to very remote parts of the globe, sample animal viruses there and bring them back to the lab and test which genetic changes using this technique called reverse engineering could allow them to infect human cells and cause human disease. So I'll break up Elon's two claims. For the first claim that this could be connected to COVID, and then the second claim that this amounted to bioweapons work. The idea that this could be connected to COVID, USAID underwrote the collection of all of these remote viruses in the wild, and also subcontracted with EcoHealth's subcontracted lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And as PREDICT was winding down, I uncovered records showing that they left behind thousands of samples, including from bats, in Wuhan Institute of Virology freezers. US Right to Know, my former employer, also uncovered that Gaza wrote an email in early 2020 as this collaboration was coming under scrutiny that said, we don't want to release the sequences of all of these viruses because it could involve blowback for our research. So it's not clear that we have the genetic data for all of these viruses. So of course that raises the question whether one of the viruses collected with USAID funding might have been the progenitor or precursor virus to SARS-CoV-2. And then there's the second claim that this amounted to bioweapons work. And as you mentioned in your intro, essentially the only difference between bioweapons work and biodefense work is the stated intent of the researchers. There's no technical, definition under the Biological Weapons Convention that distinguishes bioweapons work and quote unquote biodefense work. So you can collect novel viruses that the world has no vaccines and therapeutics to combat and call it civilian research. And even when the civilian research doesn't lead to much in the way of actual public health implications, it doesn't violate the BWC. But what I've learned over my years of research on this subject is that just because it doesn't technically violate the BWC doesn't mean that it doesn't invoke some suspicion among adversarial nations.
And is there a reason that this funding came through USAID rather than through NIH, through NIAID? I mean, part of the problem here from the standpoint of the American people trying to understand how their money is even spent by various government agencies is that it's not even just, well, the health stuff is funded by this agency. This is a totally separate thing, blurring the lines between a coherent foreign policy or humanitarian aid or assistance to other nations and health research. And then the question I'm sure some people would have, well, if NIH is the organization that does a good job, although we have some criticisms of them, some skepticisms of them, if they're the agency that has the expertise to evaluate whether this research is good research or whether it's safe or whether we should do it, well, then why is USAID the one funding this kind of stuff?
I think that's an excellent question. I don't know that I have a clear answer, but in all of my stories that I've written about USAID and this PREDICT program, I always insert a clause, USAID, which is ostensibly devoted to humanitarian aid, because it is striking that an agency ostensibly devoted to humanitarian aid, although I think that premise has sort of fallen apart in recent weeks, would fund the development of novel viruses that don't exist in nature. And the civilian premise for this research is that we can predict and prevent pandemics if we find animal viruses, we figure out how they could evolve to infect humans in the lab. It just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Viruses evolve very quickly and in unpredictable ways. And even if we were able to predict how it would evolve, there's no ability to test a therapeutic or a vaccine for a virus that hasn't spilled over into humans yet. There's no ethical way to do that. And even before COVID emerged, there were a lot of virologists in this space saying that this was essentially junk science, that you couldn't predict pandemics this way. So I think that raises a lot of questions. If the quote unquote defensive premise for this research is essentially junk science and hasn't produced any actual applicable public health measures, then is there an offensive aspect? And I don't think we should shy away from that question, although there is a huge taboo in this space against even asking that question. We're allowed to talk about the fact that Russia might have a bioweapons program or that China might have a bioweapons program, but the idea that the US might be doing research that could be classified as bioweapons is very strongly discouraged, and you're kind of called a conspiracy theorist if you even raise the question. But it's obvious that in doing this work, we could be attracting scrutiny from adversarial nations that don't trust us. And as far as why it wasn't done under Fauci's institute at the NIH, I think it's an interesting question, and I don't know this to be true, but I think we should think about the fact that this USAID PREDICT program coincided with a lot of scrutiny at Fauci's NIH, and there was a temporary moratorium on gain-of-function research at NIH, and there was a lot of discussion within this group in the scientific community interested in this research around what the NIH was doing, and so maybe some of the work that was happening at USAID attracted less scrutiny and was therefore a more attractive source of funding.
Emily, I just wanted to press in on the question of gain of function. And I know that term is in scientific terms, complicated, and there's all sorts of pretty esoteric debates about what exactly is gain of function and what isn't. But in our conversation here, I think you referred to the idea of viruses that do not exist in the wild. But to be clear, whenever you were talking about what USAID actually funded, I thought I heard you say that what they were doing was in fact collecting viruses in the wild and depositing some of those samples in Wuhan. Now, the collection of naturally existing viruses and handing them over is not what I consider to be gain of function research. Do you think they were involved in gain of function research? And if so, what am I missing in what I've just said?
Oh, yeah, it's that's an important distinction. So I'm certain they were involved in gain of function research because it's in the public scientific literature and it's a document.
Sorry, just to be clear, Emily, USAID specifically were involved in gain of function research.
So USAID funded the subcontractors EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak, which went out into remote places around the world and discovered novel animal coronaviruses. And then these same subcontractors, including EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, performed gain of function research on the animal novel coronaviruses that were discovered with USAID funding. So, and I'm glad to make that very clear. But having read a lot of the grant documents and emails, the distinction between the USAID funded work and the NIH work was not always clear, even among the collaborators.
Thank you for parsing some of that, Emily. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Sure, thanks.
When Mitch McConnell fell twice last week and was escorted out of the Capitol in a wheelchair, it did renew a debate about term limits for lawmakers. McConnell is 82.
At 90, Senator Dianne Feinstein died while still serving in office.
And age and the ailments that come with it were the undoing of President Joe Biden's failed election bid. And there's, of course, Nancy Pelosi, who at 84 has yielded power, but has been unchallenged for her seat until now.
If Shoykot Chakraborty has his way, Pelosi's days of serving in Congress are numbered. The political strategist who once served as AOC's chief of staff has announced he is taking on the former House Speaker in 2026.
His website states, quote, 20 terms in Congress is enough. He's calling for a new generation of Democratic leaders. With us now to discuss all of this is Shoykot Chakraborty. Welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, great to speak with you. Tell us why you have chosen to run against Nancy Pelosi, one of the most dominating figures in Democratic politics and American politics for the last however many decades she has been with us.
Yeah, she's been in there for 20 years, I think, or 20 terms, almost 40 years. She first got into Congress the year I was born, actually. And I think it's not just about age. I don't think it's just the term limits. I think it's a sign of a bigger problem with the Democratic Party, where you've had all these politicians who've gone into Congress at a time when America was completely different. At the time that Nancy Pelosi got into Congress, you could raise a family on a single income. You could buy a house. You could live the American dream. And a lot of that has become more and more out of reach for a big majority of Americans. Most people are afraid of a health care bill bankrupting them. Most people can't buy a house these days. People are worried that their kids are not going to do as well as them, and they're right to worry. And I think the result of this has actually been that people are voting for change every chance they get. That's what happened with Obama in 2008. That's what happened with Donald Trump in 2016 and 2024. The big message here is both parties have let the big problems in America just fester for decades and decades. They haven't done anything about it. And I think unless the Democrats completely change, and I'm not just calling for Nancy Pelosi to go, I'm actually saying we need a revolution in the whole Democratic Party leadership, not a left, right, or center revolution. We just need a whole new party with whole new people in it if we're really going to tackle the problems that we're facing at the scale we need to be tackling them.
But how would that sort of manifest itself in concrete terms, Shaukat? I mean, I know it is a huge question. How does the Democratic Party recover from what was a pretty crushing defeat for most Democrats, President Trump getting elected in November? And it is fine, I think, to, of course, identify the problems and identify the symptoms of things having gone wrong. But when you say it's not left, right, or centre, but a new party, doing what? Standing for what?
I think fundamentally standing for rebuilding this country, rebuilding its industries, its institutions. There's a huge opportunity actually for things that we could be building. There's this major opportunity globally to build a clean energy economy that's going to be millions and millions. It's a multi-trillion-dollar business opportunity that basically we're saying let's let China have all of it right now. We're not even trying. I mean, Biden made some small efforts towards it, but we're not really trying. When I think about, the way I think about this on a larger scale is you look at countries that have fallen into stagnation the way I think we have right now throughout history. It takes this kind of concerted effort, this big moment of gumption to get out of that. We did that, back when we had the Great Depression through the New Deal at first, but then really through our effort in World War II. But there's countries all around the world that they just made this decision to get richer. If you look at most developed countries today, like South Korea, Taiwan, it was a decision like that, and a new political party often, or a new political movement with an actual plan to build wealth in the country that got us out of it. So that's I think the bigger thing that I don't think either party is really advocating for right now. I think that should be combined with real efforts to get the costs of people's essentials down. I think we should have guaranteed universal health care as a way to get health care down. There's plenty of ways to do it. I think we should be tackling the spiraling costs of education and childcare. There's more proposals out there for that, but I think the bigger message here is we actually need to get back into this mode of growth and building the way we used to, that I think we've just let slide.
The Democratic Party seems extremely hostile at the leadership level to allowing new voices, younger voices in. We read off a couple examples, but I think there's no better illustration actually of the party failing to reckon with its tactical failures recently is giving Jerry Connolly rather than AOC that key oversight position. A young person who fires up the base, but actually who has a district of where a significant number of people did vote for Trump and is trying to understand how that's possible, versus the aging, ailing establishment. What is your strategy for actually getting through to elites in your party who are just not at all taking seriously criticisms of even setting aside policy of just like letting younger people have a chance?
Yeah, my honest opinion is I don't think the elites are gonna do it. They haven't been doing it for a while. I think when that oversight decision happened, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And I think it's time to replace them. I really think we need to replace dozens, if not hundreds, of incumbents in the Democratic Party right now with new, fresh voices who actually are committed. Because the problem is that the party's just lost trust among so many people, and part of that comes from decades of them not doing anything about the biggest problems. That's the case on the Republican side as well. But another part of it is people do feel that there's some corruption within the Democratic Party, whether that's real or not. But there's a real brand problem there with all the insider stock trading that Nancy Pelosi's been doing as well, and so I think we just need new people that Americans can trust, who are actually able to communicate and who have a vision. That's the biggest thing, is we need a real story to tell for how the country got to this place and how we can get out of it.
As you say, Shaukat, the former speaker has been around in politics for around about 4 decades. Obviously, in San Francisco in particular, she's extremely powerful, extremely well established. So I'm honestly curious, are you running in part simply to platform your own dissenting voice from her style of leadership? Or do you think in a head-to-head race you have a real shot of beating her in a primary?
Oh, I absolutely think I have a real shot of beating her. We're in a change moment in this country, and a lot of the political gatekeepers that used to wield a lot of power, they've become more and more irrelevant. I saw this on AOC's race when I was running her race. She ran against a very powerful Democrat, Joe Crowley. He was kind of third in line to be speaker at the time. And we heard the same things. How are you possibly going to beat him? He's got the whole Democratic Party machine in New York. He basically inherited Tammany Hall. And it turns out there's just way more ways to get directly to voters these days than there used to be. And I think a lot of the political gatekeepers are kind of paper tigers now. And you combine that with this moment where I think a lot of people are very frustrated with the Democratic Party's leadership's response to Donald Trump and kind of our inability to articulate what they're going to do next. So I'm banking on the fact that there's going to be a lot of people who are looking for change, who are kind of hungry for a new message of what that change will look like, and all the tools and technologies and podcast shows like you guys are doing to reach voters directly that'll let me get around the political gatekeepers. Because let's be real, I'm not going to win playing the normal political games. Of course, she's very powerful, very well connected, very well funded. I'll have to play a different game.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and telling our viewers about your candidacy. We've got a lot of people interested in some change in terms of who leads these establishment parties. Shoykot Chakrabarty, thank you so much for coming to Rising.
Thank you.
Up next, CNN is shocked about Donald Trump's approval ratings. We'll talk about that. Stay tuned. More good news for President Donald Trump. CBS News has released a poll showing that he has a 53% approval rating, which is a record high for him.
The numbers even stunned people over at CNN. Let's watch.
Look, but it's not just CBS. I like to take an average of the polls. And holy smokes, I mean, look at what the difference is between now versus 8 years ago during the first Trump term, right? This is Trump's net approval rating on February 10th. You go back to 2017, Trump was already underwater at -5 points on the net approval rating. That's approval minus disapproval. What a difference 8 years makes. He's on the positive side of the ledger at +4 points. And again, it's not just the CBS News poll. We're talking about the Gallup poll. We're talking about the Ipsos poll. We are talking about the Pew poll. All of these respective pollsters have Trump in a better position now than they did 8 years ago, being on the plus side of the ledger, right? In positive net approval territory, a positive net approval rating for Donald Trump. Again, whoa, 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 whoa. Entire first term, just 11 days, Donald Trump had a net positive approval rating. Compare that to the second term just so far. Every single day of Trump's second term so far, he has been on the positive side of the ledger. 21 days, all 3 weeks. That's already 10 more days than he was in his entire first term. So again, this is just another sign that Americans are far more likely to like what they're seeing in his second term than they were during his first term.
Another interesting finding from that CBS poll is that Trump has a +10 approval rating with voters under 30.
The poll did find, however, that only 13% thought Trump's Gaza takeover plan was a good idea.
Here is Trump responding to his poll numbers.
Ratings because I'm using common sense, whether it's getting men out of women's sports. Who wants an open border where prisons are dumped into our country, where prisoners are led into our country, many of whom are murderers, many of whom murdered far more than one person, and they're now roaming our country. Who wants that? I mean, it's terrible.
The CBS poll also found that 38% of Americans strongly disapprove of Trump. SiriusXM host Dean Obeidallah wrote on Blue Sky, "The only part of the CBS poll that rings true is that those who strongly disapprove of Trump is now far higher than strongly approve. The anger toward Trump is building."
Referring to CNN, soccer analyst Alexi Lalas wrote on X, "I feel like they're flabbergasted on a daily basis. At one point, does incredulity at Americans' approval of Trump make you simply out of touch?" Yeah, there's just no denying it. It's good times for Trump. He's more popular than he has ever been since emerging on the political scene. In our incredibly polarized times, it's basically just a 50-50 country. So it's hard to be much beyond that in either direction. Well, you can be beyond that in a negative direction, because despite our partisanship, sometimes we all agree that somebody sucks. But Trump is on the positive side, more so than before. When the media was training all of their fire on him in the most, hair on fire sort of way, maybe that was keeping him a little bit more underwater. Now it's not working.
It's not, but I think that people like Harry Enton, who I generally respect, are getting a little bit overexcited there for this reason. Trump's first term was aberrational in terms of those approval numbers. He and Hillary Clinton in that 2016 election had been by far the least popular nominees of major parties that we had ever seen. And so in Trump's first term, even at the start of it, as Harry did point out, the numbers were very bad. That is very uncommon for new American presidents. At the start of Joe Biden's term, his approval rating was in the 60s, depending which poll you look at, mid-60s to low 60s. And then, of course, it fell off, beginning with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and went down and down and down, and it's now pretty dismal. So the only thing that is surprising about these approval ratings for Trump is they pertain to Trump, because he has historically been a very unpopular
Right, you're right
figure.
that the president, early on, new president, often has high approval ratings. But for someone to improve over time, even set aside that it's Trump, he's become more popular over time. That is just not something that happens very much in our political world.
Well,
you steadily lose approval,
Yeah.
and then your time in office is over.
Generally speaking, but of course, generally a two-term president serves those terms consecutively, with the exception of your other hero, Grover Cleveland.
Grover!
Who we don't have polling on to see how he started his second
boy.
term. But I think that the fact that Trump is serving non-consecutive terms, I think that actually does restore a honeymoon period for him. Now, the numbers are the numbers. They do show approval for him. They also show, and I think this is an interesting point about politics in general, Robbie, they show very high numbers when people are asked, is he doing what he said he would do? And I think that I have expressed just yesterday my disagreement with many of the things that he is doing.
Right.
But I think in politics, you do get credit for following through on what you said you were going to do. And that's why even very divisive political figures often do get a significant share of popularity.
We mentioned the disapproval of the Gaza plan there. We talked to Trita Parsi about it earlier in the show. I don't support it either. Virtually no one does. I think it is a Jared Kushner idea, a recycled Jared Kushner idea from a time when Jared Kushner unfortunately had much more power over Trump's foreign policy. That was Trump's first and cardinal mistake in his first term, was putting policy in the hands of a former Democrat, Jared Kushner, who has a more internationalist foreign policy approach that I don't think pleases either of you or I. And this was his idea, and it is a bad one. We should be less involved in planning what becomes of Gaza. We were arguing about it with Trita Parsi earlier, and I do see things a little bit differently than him, but I'm on the same page that I don't know what's best for Gaza or the people of Gaza. I don't have any expertise. I don't know why the U.S. has to be involved in it. It's halfway across the globe. We've not made the situation there better. If they want to, if American companies want to rebuild the region in commerce and participation with the people who live there, fine. I don't see what our government has to do with it.
No, and I mean, what Trump is talking about is displacing them, and he was asked how many or who he wanted to displace, and he said all of them, which is essentially the definition of ethnic.
Right. We wouldn't want them displaced into the U.S. We don't want.
Well, we
the
don't want
Trump
them
movement
displaced anywhere, though.
But what I'm saying is the Trump movement does not want displaced people from the Middle East coming to Western or American countries, because there has been huge, from the conservative standpoint, issues of cultural and assimilation and crime and other things that have gotten worse for that reason. So why would we want to do that?
Right, which would open us up to a whole other conversation, because, as you say, the conservative and liberal viewpoints on that differ pretty vigorously. But I think that here the point is that there are still those areas like Gaza and like tariffs, actually, to be fair, to another topic you have skepticism about, where his popularity on those issues is lower than his overall popularity.
Coming up on Rising, Nancy Mace, Republican representative, took to the House floor, sent shockwaves over social media last night. Find out why. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace made some stunning allegations on the House floor yesterday.
Mace made a series of accusations of sexual abuse, rape, and voyeurism. Here's part of her speech.
To Eric Bowman, Patrick Bryant, Brian Musgrave, and John Osborne, you have bought yourself a one-way ticket to hell. It is nonstop. There are no connections. So I and all of your victims can watch you rot for an eternity. In November 2023, I accidentally uncovered some of the most heinous crimes against women imaginable. We're talking about rape, non-consensual photos, non-consensual videos of women and underage girls, and the premeditated, calculated exploitation of women and girls in my district.
One of the four men that Mace accused of those actions was her ex-fiance, Charleston area businessman Patrick Bryant. Bryant has denied categorically those allegations.
Mace also targeted South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. Here she is.
During the last year, I turned everything over to law enforcement and then some. I was told I, as a victim, would be investigated. Investigated for what? I am a victim here. I am turning in all of this evidence to you. And now you say victims. You're a victim of rape. You're a victim of being drugged. You're a victim of a peeping Tom and voyeurism, yet we're going to investigate you. That is what this state told me.
Wilson said he had no idea about any of those allegations against those four men, that they never made it to his office. Now, Nancy Mace took to X this morning, writing in part, John Osborne said in a phone interview, my claims were categorically untrue. If you're not guilty and did nothing wrong, why would you frantically text multiple victims minutes before my speech? Do tell, asking for a friend.
The internet naturally erupted with reactions. A Democrat strategist, John Cooper, wrote on Blue Sky, Nancy Mace gave a wild speech on the House floor to accuse her ex-fiancé of physically abusing her, recording sex acts without her consent, and conspiring with others in acts of rape. Mace said her state's top prosecutor didn't take action. He'll be her opponent if she runs for South Carolina governor in 2026. Conservative podcaster Eric Erickson wrote on X, it's going to be interesting to see if Nancy Mace reiterates the claims she made last night off the floor of the House. That's important because she can say anything on the floor of the House and escape legal liability due to Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1 of the Constitution.
That is very relevant. We'll be discussing that more in a minute. Political commentator Meghan McCain wrote, what Nancy Mace is doing tonight is incredibly brave. I literally can't imagine detailing my own date rape and sexual assault on the floor of Congress. If a powerful congresswoman wasn't believed by law enforcement, imagine what life is like for the rest of the country. Conservative political and religious commentator Rod Dreher wrote, this is wrong. If these men are guilty, may they be ground to dust, but it's not right to do this in a forum where you cannot face accountability for false and defamatory allegations. So this is very serious crimes that she describes, including with someone who was her ex-fiance, who she says there was a pattern of that she actually was raped, and that non-consensual photos and videos were taken without her permission, and that she discovered that there was such a thing for underage girls as well. Now, she made these claims on the House floor, and the way it works is that claims made there are broadly, extremely protected, immune, basically, from normal defamation, liability, that kind of thing. For good reason, in my view. Our Constitution says you have to have total ability to debate any subject without risk of liability coming into it when you're on the House floor participating in discussions of what's going to become law. Totally agree with that. I think most people agree with that. But the fact that she does it there rather than anywhere else means she's using that kind of protection, so you can't, people couldn't countersue her for defamation. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not saying it's untrue. I have no knowledge of whether this is true or not. I think women who come forward and make such claims ought to be respected and heard out and listened to, and these things should be investigated by the relevant law enforcement people, journalists, etc. Whatever evidence she has, she should share with law enforcement or with the media to substantiate these claims. I don't think one ought to be automatically believed in these situations. I disagreed with the kind of Me Too era, I would say, fervor of just automatically endorsing any claim and saying that it would be wrong or sexist or disbelieving women to not automatically endorse that. I think collectively as a nation, we have now stepped back from that a little bit and said, well, that it doesn't make any sense to, not that we're saying women are liars or that people commonly lie about this thing. That's not what anyone's saying, but people do. On any category of claims, there are some number of people who will exaggerate or outright mislead people. So take this seriously. Let's listen to this. But I would not automatically endorse what she's saying, and I certainly wouldn't automatically endorse what she says about someone who is likely to be her political opponent within the Republican Party, running, if they're going to both go run for governor, and she's saying, your office didn't take this seriously. He says, that is absolutely not true. I didn't know anything about this. You didn't tell me anything about this. He says in his statement, Congresswoman Mace and the Attorney General have been at multiple events together over the last 6 months. She has the Attorney General's personal cell phone number, and not once did she approach him or reach out to him about any of these concerns. So I do not have enough information to adjudicate that factual dispute at this moment. I would not take either side at their word about it. We have to learn more.
Right, and I think this is the important point. Obviously, neither of us can discern whether what she is saying is true or not. That is a pretty emphatic denial from the person who, as you say, would be a political opponent. And I do think you did a very good job there of laying out the fact that these things are so difficult even to discuss because she is alleging extremely serious, grotesque behavior, really, just appalling stuff. And she is doing so naming and, as we saw, showing photographs of people who have no legal recourse as far as defamation is concerned because of the venue she is using to make the allegation. I think it will be very rare for me to agree with Eric Erickson about anything, but I think it will be interesting to see, does she repeat these allegations in a forum that is less protected? Obviously, given the gravity of the allegations, if she wants to go forward with them, she should. But I am uneasy about you making those allegations and showing those photos in a place where you're essentially immune from legal blowback.
Yes, I share that unease significantly. If viewers can't tell from my commentary, I don't know. We're going to look into it more. I'm sure we're going to hear more about this. But the choice of that forum itself is, frankly, it raises my skepticism in a way that wouldn't necessarily be triggered. And again, the fact that this seems to have a political motivation in line as well is also colors my commentary.
In relation to that one person, yeah.
With respect to the one person. Now, and she is not just saying that this is going to end up being a he said, she said in terms of some date she was on with this ex-fiance. She is saying there is videos and photos, not just with her, because he could say those were consensual, but involving underage people. So that can't be consensual no matter what. There's no way to spin that. If that's true, law enforcement should be able to substantiate that with minimal difficulty. So we should be looking out for that. I'm sure we'll be discussing it more to come. Thanks so much for watching today. That does it for us on the show. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you later.